The ongoing election season, inheritance tax has become a buzzword in the political domain currently. What does inheritance tax mean? What's the whole controversy around inheritance tax? On this edition of Business Plus, we are asking 5 key questions. And to answer these questions, we have a very special guest joining us. We have Mr. Srinath Sridharan, policy researcher and corporate advisor, joining us on the broadcast. Srinath, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Business Plus. I'm going to begin with question number 1 for you, Srinath, and it's a very simple question. Explain to us what exactly is inheritance tax.
Morning, Krishna. Inheritance tax, by the simple definition, luckily the tax doesn't exist in India, is a taxation when somebody passes on after their life, whatever assets they owned, whichever and whatever is given to any successor is taxed by the government. And there are 2 methods of taxation in inheritance tax that's globally applied. One method is, if let's say my father passes away and leaves 100 rupees worth of land, and let's say the taxation were 55%, then the government would sell that estate, take 55 rupees and give me 45, or I will have to, the other one is at the hands of the successor, which means I will have to pay 45 rupees and then take that land to my account. India did have inheritance tax. It was imposed right after the Indian independence in the early 50s. And luckily in 1985, it was abandoned. And if you remember, this inheritance tax was seen, there was a time when India had taxation, personal income taxation as high as 90%. We lived in an era where being rich or wealth creators was almost seen as a sin. And now with the demographic dividend, we are suddenly realizing we need to make money. It is not okay. It is okay to make money, and it is not okay not to shy away from these capitalist model. I think that's the beauty of inheritance tax.
All right. Now comes my second question. What exactly is the controversy in India around inheritance tax at the moment?
Very simple. I think some of these new, so-called new ideas to come during an election campaign or electoral season will create controversies on its own. I mean, today, let's say, Krishna, if I were a standing candidate and get up and say, I think water should be taxed more, I can tell you it will make more controversy, right? I mean, so from that perspective, one of the opposition parties, let's say for 60 years has been a loyalist or more, and saying Mr. Sam Petroda speaking about inheritance tax and speaking about US inheritance tax, I think has a lot of flaws. One, his own government, if you remember, kind of abandoned it. And over a point in time, there were a lot of chatter, including during COVID, there were chatter whether wealth tax would be brought in as a levy. No, it did not. 2, I think also the other point about inheritance tax is very, very simple. It does not work globally. There are many countries. By the way, US does not have a federal inheritance tax, and that's a flaw in one of his arguments that he has made. Only 6 states in the US actually levy something like an inheritance tax, or call it an estate tax. It is not a national tax. 2, India does not need an inheritance tax because our number of taxpayers, Krishna, if you look at it, are less than 1% of the population. So how do you expect to juice out the guys who already have, and the rest gets scot-free? And I think that is where the controversy has started, saying that we should be celebrating wealth creators and generators, and not just look at it almost like a communist or a socialist model of market making.
Right. Now comes the third question. Is inheritance tax a penalty for being rich in India?
See, I think we come from, Krishna, I think you and I come from a generation where we waited for many years to have a landline at home. And that's an India that we want to leave behind, and say that today we have moved to a consumption economy where there are indirect taxes, right? I mean, let's take the highest personal tax level, 37%, including cess and surcharges that you end up paying, which means for every 100 rupees that you earn, you offset it against your deductions, you still end up paying about 37%. So you in hand, you actually end up with 63. And with that 63, you're going to invest for your savings, investments, whatever you do. You might start a business. But for everything that you consume, products or services, there's an average, let's say 12% on GST that you end up paying. So in effect, the net income that you have for your lifestyle and livelihood is probably 50%. I mean, from that perspective, India is already one of the highest tax countries for the poor civic infrastructure that we have. On top of it, if you're going to say, you know what, you can enjoy the benefits of whatever you have created during your lifetime, but after you, it won't go to your family. I'm going to tax it. I mean, that is where I think the disconcert comes from everybody. I think that's a point that uh, this entire controversy is all about.
Okay. Now on to question number 4. Is there any economic merit at all in considering inheritance tax?
See, I think you twist, I mean, you want to kind of torture any data, it'll give you the answer that you want. But my belief is inheritance tax doesn't make sense for India today. Today, we would rather have our next generation. We are a nation of demographic dividend, two-thirds of people are less than 35. We would want them to earn, generate wealth, create assets in India and abroad, rather than tax them and punish them. The challenge that if you start doing that is you're going to push off a lot of these people, especially those who are the wealth generators. Let's say the startup guys, the business folks, they are going to leave this country and go settle elsewhere where it doesn't have inheritance tax. So I think that's where we'll have to be very cautious. There is no merit in having an inheritance tax. I think that's a comfort that people, the rich and the wealthy, should think about.
Okay. And finally, on to question number 5, Srinath, and that's a very simple question. Inheritance tax exists in Western countries like the US and UK and other countries. If it works for them, why not for the other?
So I think, Krishna, a fundamental change, right? In India, we have less than 1% of the people paying income tax. In the US, the number is far, far higher. I mean, it's north of 50%. So if you look at a lot of those tax slabs and tax structures of how the overall population contributes to the country, I think that is where the fundamental challenge is. We cannot really go out and punish people just because they are creating wealth, just because, say, 3 or 4% of our country are creating assets. So that's the biggest differentiator that we need to do. 2, we take great pride in saying India is one of the largest consumption economy in the world. And that also means that there is an inherent tax slab that we are already bringing in. Whatever you buy, consume is already taxed at source. So from that perspective, whatever people are paying to consume, they're actually indirectly paying to the government coffers. So it is unfair to say that there is no tax structure of that kind. But we don't need inheritance tax. Let's say improve the per capita GDP to probably 8 to 10x. Then we can look at inheritance tax. Not today.
Okay. All right. We leave it at that. Srinath, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us and answering all those questions.